Welcome back to music class. For the last week of January, I have something big planned. It actually came about from last week. Last week we were talking about the dynamics, right? We had, on the most basic level, we had forte, right? Forte, if I play forte, it means strong, right? Which comes out most of the time as loud, right? The opposite of that is piano, meaning gentle. If I play gently, most of the time that comes out as soft. So in general, forte loud, piano soft. That's an easy way to remember. Now this instrument, the piano, was named after dynamic levels. And it got me thinking, we should do something really big this week. Let's talk about the history of this instrument, the piano. Woo! Well, that's a huge topic. In order to really do the whole thing, I need several hours, several weeks. We don't have time for that. So this is just a quick whirlwind sampler platter. So I'm going to be leaving out whole sections of history, but I'm just skipping through to give you a few little glimpses into this instrument, the piano. So we have to go back in history. The instrument that came before the piano was the harpsichord. But we're going back even before that. There was an instrument before the harpsichord. We have to go back to Europe, back into the year 13 something, I'm not even sure, an instrument called the clavichord. The clavichord was the very first keyboard instrument that had strings. So by keyboard, I mean something that looks like this. You've all seen this before. The black and white keys. You hit a key and a sound comes out. Well, they had other keyboard instruments that were wind-powered, like our organ in church, had the same kind of keyboard, except that controlled pipes. The clavichord, you hit a key and sound came out through a string. So here we are. I found a video of this guy, I think his name is David Schrader, showing you the clavichord. It's probably an instrument you haven't seen before. So here we are, the clavichord.
The instrument I have right here is a replica of a German clavichord made about 1600. And the sound is very small. The clavichord was never meant to be a public instrument. It was meant to be a private instrument to be played alone or for the listening pleasure of a small number of your best friends, and maybe a very small voice could sing with it. As you can see, the clavichord is just a rectangular box with strings in it. If I open it up like this, I could put a book of music here if I wanted to. And on this instrument, there are two strings for every note. But there's a catch there, and that means that some of the keys share the same set of strings, and for that reason, we call it a fretted clavichord. Just like frets on a guitar, where several notes are gotten from one string. For example, F, F sharp, and G are all gotten from the same string. That gives us, to be sure, some disadvantages. You can't play those notes together, but the older music doesn't require them. What it does give us, advantage-wise, is that it makes for less strings to tune and also for less tension on this resonating box, so the sound from the soundboard here is a lot freer. And it sounds like this.
If you've seen a clavichord before, wow, congratulations. I had heard of one for many years, but I didn't get to play my first clavichord until I was probably 30-something. I saw one in a music store in Santa Barbara. I had a lot of fun playing on it for a while. Well, that store's not in there anymore. But anyway, the clavichord is not very common. But you might have noticed a few things about it. First of all, well, the important thing is that the player's using a keyboard, not playing directly on the strings. Right, like a guitar, the guitarist he or she uses fingers directly on the strings, right? And you either use your fingers to pluck or maybe a pick, but there's no mechanism. The player uses his or her fingers directly on the strings. Clavichord is a keyboard instrument. The other thing is that compared to our modern piano, the piano has a huge range of 88 keys. The clavichord you saw, well, it was probably only about from here to about here. So as you see, there's a lot of room on either end where the modern piano was not yet developed. And the other cool thing about that instrument is it's portable. I can't take the piano with me, but the clavichord was small enough that you could probably just pick it up and put it, well, not in your car because they didn't have cars back then, but you would have thrown it into the carriage, the horse-drawn carriage on the seat next to you or on the floor, and it would come with you to the next royal gathering. Because these instruments could only be afforded by the rich royalty, so they weren't really for everyday people. All right, so now the other thing, you might have noticed the strings. Now on the modern piano, especially the one in church, a grand piano, the strings go way back. You can see them if you're the performer. These strings actually go the other direction, right, perpendicular. So let's get back to the guitar, and I'll kind of show you how the clavichord works. This is a little bit crude, and it's a guitar, not a clavichord. But basically what happens is when you hit a key, there's a metal piece called the tangent that strikes part of the string, so it's kind of like this sound. Again, that's kind of crude, but that's basically what happens when you hit a string. If it's a higher string, it's a higher sound, right? Anyway, so it's basically metal on metal, which is why it has kind of a harsh attack. Anyway, that's enough of the clavichord. Now we're moving on to our another instrument. This is like the piano's, if the clavichord is like the piano's grandma or grandpa, now we're going to the harpsichord, which is like the mother or father. So the harpsichord, now back to the guitar, most of the time you don't hit the guitar with a metal thing, you actually pluck this string, right? Using your fingers or a pick. So the harpsichord is a keyboard instrument in which the strings are plucked. So here we go, the harpsichord. Notice that the harpsichord looks a lot more like a piano.
Here we have a harpsichord, and it has one keyboard. Many people have probably seen harpsichords that have two keyboards. That really just adds another set of strings to the instrument and fulfills different expressive requirements, but fundamentally it's all the same. Now, unlike the clavichord, whose action you could see a second ago striking the strings, on the harpsichord, it plucks the string just like you might do on a guitar. And to that end, harpsichord's action looks like this. Just like the clavichord, every note's got two choirs of strings, except here, every note's got its own two independent set of strings. There's no such thing as a fretted harpsichord. And when I play a key, it levers up a device here called a jack, just like Jack and Jill. And when I take that jack out, in it is a flexible tongue. And in that tongue is a tiny little guitar pick, which we call a plectrum. And that tongue is flexible. It can move so that after I've played my note, that plectrum can fall back over the string. Now, you'll hear sort of a pada there. The strings are staggered, and that makes for a more sensitive touch on the harpsichord. If you had to muscle down both strings at the same time, the sound wouldn't be as attractive, and the player wouldn't have as much control. And harpsichords can vary from a kind of a delicate lute-like whisper to a pretty brilliant sound. I'll play you a little 16th century dance from the Antwerp Dance Book of 1587, and you'll get an idea of what it sounds like.
The harpsichord was a very important, very popular keyboard instrument, along with the organ. Those were the two most popular keyboard instruments before the piano was invented. Now, there's an important difference between what you just saw, the harpsichord, and the one that came before it, the clavichord. Now, remember how David showed you on the clavichord, he said, I think the notes were F, F sharp, and G. There were three notes, three keys, that shared the same string, which means that if you wanted to play all three of those notes at once, like you can on the piano, well, I know it's not the prettiest sound, but you couldn't do that on a clavichord. If you did that, you would probably just hear the top note. Now, the harpsichord has each key has its own string or sets of strings. So it means that on the harpsichord, if you wanted to, you could play that, or you could play any combination. I'm just going to make up a crazy chord. Let's see if you had. Well, that is kind of a crazy chord. They wouldn't have played that on the harpsichord because at the time that was considered a little dissonant, didn't sound so good. But they could certainly do something like this. Just play a whole bunch of triads in a row if they wanted on the harpsichord. So that's one main difference, is every key had its own set of strings. Now, you heard him talk about ba-dum, right? When you play one key, sometimes you hear the ba-dum. Well, that comes from, now, what makes the sound on a harpsichord, this is a guitar pick, but it's kind of like the plectrum. If you imagine that my finger is a string, right? You press the key, and this is what you get. I know it's a guitar, but this is basically what happens on the harpsichord. The plectrum or pick goes through the string and makes the sound. Well, sometimes if they wanted the harpsichord a little bit louder, they wouldn't just have one string, they would have two vertically. So then the plectrum would go ba-dum, right? It would go through both of those. So that's how you get the ba-dum sound, in case you're wondering. They didn't hit both of them at the same time. It was one after the other. Ba-dum. So every string was ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. Lots of ba-dums. All right. Now, the harpsichord, also, you noticed, it looked a lot like a piano, right? It had the lid with the hinged lid that went up, so the sound would go out. So, and already, also, the harpsichord was a much bigger instrument than what you saw before. The clavichord had a smaller range. I think it was like this F to this C. The harpsichord was lower, a lower note and a higher top note. I don't remember what it was, but it was a bigger instrument, so already more powerful and louder. But there's one really important difference between the harpsichord and the piano, other than the fact that the strings are plucked, is that no matter how much force, if you hit the keys like boom and pound on them, just the same thing with the organ, if you pound on the keys or play them delicately, you get the same sound. It has to do with how the plectrum goes over the strings. If you pound on the keys, you get boom. If you do it delicately, it's the same thing, boom. So there was no dynamic range. You could have, if you wanted just piano, you would set it on one setting, and then it would stay that way the whole time, right? If you did want forte, you could have a dynamic, but then you would have to switch to the different keyboard. And sometimes actually you'd see two keyboards playing at once. You'd play on one, the second one would play. It looked like ghosts playing, kind of a cool effect. But it would stay at that level the whole time. So you could do piano, and then suddenly jump right up to forte or mezzo forte, and then jump right back down, but there was no subtle shading of dynamics. So now we're ready for the piano. Now we're in Italy in about the year 1700, and we have this man, the inventor of the piano. So his name is Bartolomeo. That's his first name. It's kind of like Bartholomew or Bart, but in Italian, Bartolomeo. His last name, now I'm going to say Cristofori. I don't know if that's correct. Some people say Cristofori. I say Cristofori. Well, first because I don't know for sure. Also because I do know in Italian, often there's a big accent just before that last syllable, right? Like Bartolomeo or lasagna, Ferrari, right? So I'm going to say Cristofori, just to be consistent. If I messed up his name, well, I messed it up. All right, so now this is the only picture we have of him. It's actually a photograph of a portrait, and the portrait was lost in World War II somewhere in Europe, so this is all we have, but the inventor of the piano. Now, you'll notice this is a cross-section, a drawing of what happens when you hit one key. An important difference between this and the harpsichord that came before it. Remember the harpsichord, we had a plectrum. It's a guitar pick, but when you hit a key, you get boom, right? Or boom, right? Now, plucked strings. This shows a hammer striking the string. And also, importantly, because you have a hammer, if you hit the key very gently, or piano, right? The hammer, you get this sound. Dong, right? If you strike it with a lot of force, you get forte, and it sounds like boom, nice and loud, right? So, because of that, we have the name that this guy came up with this instrument, one of the longest names I can think of for an instrument. Here's the official name for the piano. The clavicembalo col piano e forte. Did you get that? Clavicembalo col piano e forte. Well, that means clavicembalo is a fancy Italian name for harpsichord. Col piano e forte means that it could do both soft and loud. So the official name, clavicembalo col piano e forte, is the same as saying harpsichord that can play soft and loud. That's a mouthful, so that's why most of the time we just say we play the piano. All right, so let's look at some of his instruments. Now we have pictures of 3 of the oldest pianos in the world. Now we don't have any pictures of the original piano from 1700. That was probably destroyed or lost. We don't even know where it went. And that happened with a lot of the older instruments. In fact, all 3 of these instruments are in museums in the world, but they're not playable. They just weren't maintained and kept up. And in fact, this one I think was eaten by worms at one point. So now remember, this is 300 years ago, so this one was probably just sitting in a back room of someone's castle for a long time until finally one day somebody realized, oh, these are some of the original pianos. And then I'm sure they got cleaned up and put them in museums. So anyway, what did they sound like? Well, we don't know because, first of all, there were no recordings back then. This was before electricity. The closest I could find was I have a video for you to watch of a woman playing a copy of one of these, a modern copy of one of these, at a museum in Japan. Now the sound quality is not great, and also you'll hear people talking in the background because it's at a museum, but at least we can imagine what one might have sounded like.
The following sample performance is played on a replica of the Cristofori piano. This piano, built in 1995, is currently on display at the Hamamatsu Museum of Musical Instruments in Japan.
The city where that video was made, Hamamatsu, Japan, is actually where Yamaha has a big factory. So this piano is a Yamaha, right? The piano in the lounge is a Yamaha. The big black grand piano in the church is a Yamaha. I grew up playing on a Yamaha piano, so all those pianos were probably made at the same factory in Hamamatsu, Japan. Now back to pianos before the factory days. Now we have to fast forward several decades to the end of the 1700s. The piano's been around for a while now, and we have 2 of the most famous composers ever, Mozart and Beethoven, writing music for the piano. They were both brilliant pianists as well, so I want to show you the kind of piano they would have played on. Now look especially at the keyboard. See if it looks a little different from what you were expecting.
We have no better example of that than the modern grand piano and the piano as Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart or Joseph Haydn or the young Ludwig van Beethoven knew it. This piano is a replica of 2 different instruments. One lives in a museum in Nuremberg in Germany. The other one lives in a museum in Vienna. And they were both made by a man named Anton Walter, spelled just like Walter. He was the one who made the instrument that Mozart finally bought. As you can see, this instrument has 58 notes, whereas the modern piano has 88 notes. So we're 30 notes gone, but this has everything you need to play all the classical period music straight up to almost middle period Beethoven. That's for historical time, probably around 1800. is indeed a piano, though I should show you the action to give you an idea of the difference. So I'm going to pull this pin out here, and the action sits on a sled. I have to look down to make sure I don't break any hammers. And out it comes. Now, on this piano, the hammers are leveraged up. When I rock the lever, it pushes a little beak here right past a thing called an escapement. So the hammer can hit the string and then fall right back without making a thunk. The hammer heads are covered with deer skin. And since piano builders were experimenting all the time during this time period, because piano was a new type of instrument, some people use the shiny side of the deer skin up, and some people use the fuzzy side. And this piano uses the fuzzy side. So as you can see, we've got the key lever, the hammer, a thing called a back check so that it doesn't bounce back like someone on a trampoline, and then the escapement so that the hammer can escape and fall back down. Now we put the action back in.
Wow, you just got to see the inside of the piano. That's the mechanism, right? That thing that he pulled out and shows you what happens when you press a key. There's a lot of stuff happening in there, right? Then he put it back in. That's what's called the action of the piano. So you could say that the piano is an action-packed instrument. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Did you notice the keyboard? Now, here we have white keys and then the black keys up top. On Mozart's piano, it was reversed, right? We had black here and white up here. Now, I've seen all kinds of things over the years. I've seen a harpsichord once that had black down here and then brown up here for the sharps and flats. It doesn't really matter. I mean, if you play, as long as you can feel with your fingers, you know where the sharps and flats are. It could be green and pink for all I care, although it might get a little distracting. So, all right. Now, most of you know that the piano, the modern piano, has pedals, which my foot, the player's foot, operates, right? So the pedal on the right is called the damper's pedal. If I play some chords, nothing much, and then I hit the pedal, it keeps ringing until I lift up the pedal. When the sound gets muddy enough, I can stop it with the pedal. Now this piano also has what we call a practice pedal. I press the one in the middle, and there's a strip of felt that comes down that muffles it a little bit. So if you wanted to practice and not bother people in the other room as much, muffles it a little bit. That's an idea that was borrowed from Mozart's piano. So let's get back to Mozart's piano. Wait till you see where the pedals are.
And we'll hear that the sound of this piano isn't nearly as loud as that of the modern piano. But what it has is an interesting tone color change. If I start by playing really softly and I start to play louder, you're going to hear the actual attack of the sound change. The treble range of the instrument was said in the 18th century to sound a little bit like woodwinds. I think especially clarinet, but the bass, on the other hand, is kind of reedy, and you can understand why in Mozart's piano concertos, even a small instrument like this could stand out with an orchestra. So. Now, you notice, well, those of you who might be able to see my knee down here, there's no pedal on this instrument like there is on a modern piano. If I want to lift the dampers, I do it with my right knee. If I use my left knee, I can interpose a layer of felt in between the hammers and the strings. And that's called a moderator. It disappeared from the piano. It was never on English pianos, which are more the direct ancestors of the modern piano. But when it disappeared, we lost a valuable tone color. It's very kind of muted and muffled. A little bit harp-like. We can imagine it in certain places in Beethoven and other composers. When these Viennese or South German style pianos got bigger, they still kept that moderator stop. And so they had that color as an option into about the 1830s or so. But this is the piano that Mozart would have played his concertos on. And as we can see, when we progress over to the modern piano, that it is, it's gotten a little bit bigger. So I'm going to give you about 8-10 bars of a Mozart piano sonata on this piano, and then I will take it over to the modern piano.
So that was Mozart played on a modern piano, just like the one we have in church. We're going to head over there in a few minutes and I'll show you more about our piano. But there's a few highlights, things I don't want to miss on this quick tour of the piano. We have this man, Franz Liszt. Franz Liszt was basically the first rock star. Woo! Now, he didn't play rock and roll music because he was alive from 1811 to 1886, and rock and roll didn't really come around until the 1950s, so it wasn't rock and roll, but he was a rock star. He basically invented the piano concert as we know it today. Now, before him, yeah, they had pianos in concerts, but usually the piano would be playing with other instruments, maybe some strings, clarinets, other things, an orchestra, maybe a choir, and also the pianist would be sitting facing the audience or facing with their back to the audience, most usually so they could conduct the orchestra or the other instruments. Now, Liszt came up with the idea of taking the piano and turning it on its side. So, well, the audience could watch his fingers flying over the keyboard. Pretty flashy, right? He also felt like he had a very handsome profile with his nose, and he had long hair, so he would toss his hair about as he played and dazzled the audience. He was one of the first to think of the idea of walking out on stage from the wings, right, those curtains at the side. He would walk out, take a bow, the crowd would go wild. It also turned out he was one of the very best pianists ever as well. So unfortunately, there's no audio or video of him because that just didn't exist back then, but he was a composer, he would improvise, just a brilliant musician. So Franz Liszt, we don't want to miss, the first rock star. Now we have a couple of unusual pianos. First up, the Giraffe. Well, it's called the Giraffe because it kind of looks like it has a long neck sticking up. Now, all the pianos I've shown you so far had the strings horizontal and the keyboard at one end, the strings stretching out, taking up lots of floor space, the design that came from the harpsichord. Well, someone had the brilliant idea to save floor space. Why don't we take the strings and put them vertical? Well, if you do that, this is what you get, the Giraffe. Now, as most of you know, the low notes or bass strings are on this end, right? To make low notes, you need really long, usually thicker, bass strings, which go way up or way out with a piano. Then the high notes or treble have teeny tiny strings. So that's where you get this funny shape, bass to treble, right? So then somebody realized, oh, you know what? We can still have the strings vertical, but what if we take these bass strings and put them instead down here at a diagonal? You can still have long bass strings, but they can still be inside the piano cabinet, and it's also easier to fit the other strings in too. So if you imagine taking the top and making it flat, well, that resembles the piano that you've seen that we have here in the choir room, which is the modern upright or vertical piano. But before that, they had the Giraffe. So you don't see many of these anymore. Now, the keyboard is pretty normal looking though, right? It's got mostly white keys and then the blacks for the sharps and flats, so that's normal at least. Well, what about a keyboard that looks totally different? More strange pianos. Well, if you cover up the keyboard, the rest of it looks pretty normal. We have just a regular upright piano, flat top, so at least it's not a giraffe. But the keyboard, what is this? Well, this was invented by a guy named Janko, I'm not sure, he's Hungarian, but he was a mathematician and a musician, mathematician. He thought that a lot of the piano pieces were really complicated, hard to play. They had some tough reaches and things, so he came up with this whole new keyboard that was supposed to make it easier for the amateur to learn how to play. Well, to me this doesn't really make sense. It looks complicated. I can see that the black keys alternate. There's 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2. So that's kind of like a regular piano. But there's a row here and here. You can also go up this way too. I'm not sure. To me, it looks really complicated and a lot to learn. Let's see, what else we have? This is another variation of the same thing. This is a whole bunch of white keys in a row, a whole bunch of black keys. Then, I don't know, do you go up this way or diagonally? I'm not quite sure. To me, it's complicated. Though just like any instrument, if you practice on it, you'd get better. But I'd rather stick with the keyboard I know, because at least I know what I'm doing. So it just goes to show you, though, that ever since the piano was invented, people have been tinkering with it, coming up with new ways, things that they think will improve it. So maybe one of you will come up with a brilliant improvement on the piano. I thought we'd finish off our quick tour of the history of the piano right here in church with Bethany's biggest and best piano, a grand piano made by Yamaha. Now, I skipped many years between Mozart's piano and the modern piano, so a lot has happened since then. So let me just do a quick recap. The first thing you'll notice if you look inside it is that there's a lot of metal, right? Mozart's piano was pretty much had a wood frame. Well, the modern piano has so many strings and there's so much tension in there, they decided you need to have a cast iron frame to hold all that tension, otherwise the wood would just buckle. So first thing you'll notice, lots of metal. Now you'll notice some designs that came over from the harpsichord. Here we have the top, right? You can open up the lid if you want the sound to come out. So that's from the harpsichord, right? Bass strings on the low end, treble strings on the high, that's where we get that funny little shape. Now another thing, I skipped also over Steinway. Now Steinway is a super important piano manufacturer. The modern piano basically came together under Steinway. Now we don't have a Steinway here at Bethany, but that's okay. This is also a great piano. So now Steinway, they decided these bass strings were super long and they didn't want to make them all parallel. They decided you could have some of them at an angle, overlapping over the rest of the strings. Now the rest of the strings are parallel. So it means that you get actually more sound over the middle of the soundboard, so you get a richer sound. So that's another thing. Let's see. Maybe let's get a different angle now. Here's the challenge. It's just me, I'm the camera crew, and I'm using a laptop, so it's kind of heavy. I hope I don't drop it. But I want to show you a few features of this piano. Hopefully I can get up close enough so you can actually see what's happening. So when you hit a key, let's do this one. Okay, you hit a key and something happens inside the piano, right? There's a hammer underneath that hits the string and then the damper comes up. So let me zero in on this. Let's see. Actually, I'll play several notes so you can kind of see. The black things going up and down are the dampers. If you see something white, kind of wooden moving, those are the hammers. The hammers come from underneath the strings. They hit the strings and make the sound. So now let's talk about the pedals. All right, the pedal on the right is the one that people use the most. That's called the dampers pedal. So now I'm going to try to get a different angle here without damaging the piano. All right, so I'm going to use the pedal on the right. Watch these black things. See what happens when I press the pedal. See the move? Dampers up, dampers down. Oop, dampers up, pedal on, dampers down. So what does that do? Well, the dampers come up whenever I play a note. When I let go of the note, the damper comes down, it stops the sound. Now, if I lift up all the dampers and start to play, it rings like a big harp. Now, dampers off. So it's almost like a big hand putting a hand on the strings to silence the piano. So, all right, let's talk about the middle pedal. Almost nobody talks about that one. The middle pedal is called the sostenuto pedal. Now I'm going to put the computer down for a second here. All right, you don't really need to see much of what's happening. But the middle pedal is kind of like a memory pedal. So if I want to take this note, actually I'll make it so you can see the keyboard. All right, let's say I pick this note, then I hit that pedal. It means everything else is like a regular piano. This note keeps ringing only that note. What if we want to make it a chord? Let's take a C chord. Whoops. That's kind of stored in the piano's so-called memory. Just that chord. So it's kind of a cool effect. The pedal on the left, we call that the una corda, which means one string. Now, it doesn't really make one string. What it does is, I don't know if you can see this, I'm going to do pedal on, pedal off. I don't know if you can see, it's hard to see with me shaking the computer, but basically maybe you can see it better on the inside of the piano, probably. All right, no, well, yes, you can see something moving. Anyway, basically the whole action moves, and it changes the sound of the piano a little bit. So if I play a C chord and I use the una corda pedal, it changes the sound a little bit, right? So it makes it, what some people call it, a little softer. It's not really soft, because you can still play, you can put the pedal on, I can still play loud and soft, but then without the pedal, it just has a little brighter sound. So anyway, those are some features of the modern piano. My arm's getting tired, and I think it's time to stop anyway. So as I said, this was just the quick whirlwind tour, the overview. I left out a whole lot of stuff in the middle, but I hope you learned something. I hope it was fun, and I will see you all next week.